Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the courtroom that never fails to deliver shocking drama and unforgettable lessons. Today, we're diving into one of the most outrageous moments ever caught on Judge Judy. It started off like any other case, a plaintiff stepping forward, a defendant ready to defend themselves, and Judge Judy presiding with her no-nonsense authority. But what unfolded was something that left the audience gasping, the bailiff shaking his head, and even Judge Judy herself visibly stunned. Because this wasn't just another ordinary case of neighbors bickering, families fighting over money, or disputes about broken promises. No, this case gave us one of the most disrespectful displays of arrogance ever seen in Judge Judy's courtroom. And at the center of it all? A woman who quickly became known as the Karen who mocked Judge Judy. From the moment she stepped into the courtroom, her attitude was impossible to miss. Arms crossed tightly, lips curled into a smirk, and an air of superiority that filled the space. You know the type, rolling her eyes before anyone even says a word, acting like she's above the law, and treating the judge like some sort of inconvenience instead of the authority figure she is. Now, Judge Judy has dealt with just about everything in her decades on television. She's seen liars, manipulators, people crying fake tears, and folks who thought they were clever enough to outsmart her. But if there's one thing Judge Judy cannot tolerate, it's blatant disrespect in her courtroom. The case itself was simple enough. At least, it should have been. The plaintiff claimed that the defendant, this so-called Karen, owed money for damages. Nothing too unusual. Judge Judy began by asking her usual pointed questions, cutting through the nonsense and getting straight to the facts. But instead of answering respectfully, the defendant leaned back, smirked, and gave the judge a mocking laugh. She rolled her eyes as if to say, "Are you kidding me? This is beneath me." Now, you could feel the tension rise instantly. The audience went still. The bailiff gave her a quick side-eye, like he already knew what was about to happen. And Judge Judy? She froze for just a split second, her sharp eyes narrowing. That's when it happened. The defendant, this Karen, actually had the audacity to mock Judge Judy's ruling. She smirked, shook her head, and laughed under her breath when Judy laid down her interpretation of the evidence. Not only that, but she mouthed the words, "Yeah, right," while looking directly at the judge. Let's pause right there. Anyone who has ever watched Judge Judy knows exactly what comes next when someone dares to cross that line. Judge Judy doesn't play games. She doesn't let disrespect slide. And she definitely doesn't allow anyone to undermine her authority in her own courtroom. The audience leaned forward. You could feel it building, like the moment right before a storm hits. Judge Judy slowly took off her glasses, leaned forward, and in her calm yet cutting voice, asked, "Did you just laugh at my ruling?" Silence. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but instead of apologizing, what a normal, rational person would do, she doubled down. She shrugged and said, "Well, it's just ridiculous. I mean, seriously? Who even takes this stuff seriously?" That was it. You could see it on Judge Judy's face. The patience was gone. The tolerance had evaporated. And what came next would change the entire tone of that courtroom. Because in less than 1 minute, 47 seconds to be exact, that smug smirk was completely wiped off the defendant's face. What started as mockery would end in humiliation. What began with laughter would end with tears. And trust me, nobody saw it coming as fast as it did. The moment Judge Judy narrowed her eyes at the smirking defendant, the entire courtroom shifted. It was as if the temperature in the room dropped. Everyone knew something was about to happen, everyone except, apparently, the woman who thought she could laugh in the face of a judge. Judge Judy leaned forward, her hands resting firmly on the desk in front of her. She didn't raise her voice, not yet. Instead, she used the calm, razor-sharp tone that always signals one thing: someone is about to be put in their place. "Excuse me," Judge Judy said, tilting her head slightly. "Did you just laugh at my ruling? Did I hear that correctly?" The defendant, still holding onto her smug attitude, gave a half-shrug. She muttered, "I mean, yeah, it's just so ridiculous." I can't believe we're even wasting time on this. Now let's pause here. If you've ever seen Judge Judy in action, you know that dismissing her courtroom as a waste of time is one of the fastest ways to set off fireworks. She doesn't allow anyone to forget where they are, a court of law, not a stage for arrogance. Judy sat back in her chair for a moment, almost as if she were giving the woman one last chance to redeem herself. But the defendant's face stayed plastered with that condescending smirk. And then, with the precision of a surgeon, Judge Judy struck. "Let me explain something to you, young lady," she said firmly, pointing a finger across the courtroom. "This is not your living room. This is not social media where you type out silly comments for attention. This is my courtroom. And when you walk into my courtroom, you respect the process. You respect the law. And above all, you respect me." The audience erupted in muffled applause, a ripple of energy moving across the room. Even the bailiff raised his eyebrows like, "Here we go." But Judge Judy wasn't finished. "You may think you're clever," she continued, her voice rising ever so slightly, "but I assure you, you're not the first person to roll your eyes at me, and you won't be the last. But do you know what happens to people who think they can laugh at justice? They find out very quickly that there's nothing funny about it." And just like that, Judge Judy did something that completely dismantled the defendant's arrogance. She ordered the plaintiff's evidence to be reread, every receipt, every photograph, every detail. As the evidence piled up against her, that smug smile started to fade. You could actually see the moment reality hit. The color drained from her face, her arms uncrossed, and suddenly, she wasn't leaning back so comfortably anymore. Judge Judy noticed it too. "Oh, what's the matter?" Judy asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Not so funny anymore? Does it look like a joke now that the facts are in front of your face?" The defendant tried to speak, stumbling over her words, but Judy cut her off immediately. "Don't you dare interrupt me. You had your chance to speak, and you chose to mock instead of explain. Now you'll sit there and listen while I tell you exactly how this is going to end." And that was it. The breaking point. Within seconds, 47 to be exact, the woman who had walked into the courtroom full of arrogance was sitting in stunned silence, her face red, her eyes beginning to water. Judge Judy delivered the ruling with authority, ordering the defendant to pay the damages in full. No wiggle room. No sympathy. Just a clear, firm judgment. And then came the final blow. "Let me give you some free advice," Judge Judy said, lowering her voice but keeping her words sharp as glass. "The next time you think about laughing at authority, remember this moment. Remember how quickly your laughter turned into tears. Because if you don't learn that lesson now, life will teach it to you again, and I promise, it won't be as gentle as I've been today." At that, the defendant's composure completely collapsed. Her eyes welled up, her voice cracked, and she finally broke down crying in front of everyone. 47 seconds. That's all it took. From mocking laughter to complete humiliation. From arrogance to regret. And as the bailiff moved the case along and the cameras zoomed out, the audience could only shake their heads. Some smirked at the irony, others whispered to each other about what they had just witnessed. But everyone agreed on one thing: Judge Judy had once again proven why she's unmatched in the courtroom. Because in her world, respect isn't optional, and mockery has consequences. The gavel had come down, the ruling had been made, and yet the energy in the courtroom lingered like a storm that had just passed. Everyone had seen what happened. In less than a minute, a woman who walked in confident and smug had been stripped of her arrogance and reduced to tears. The bailiff gave a subtle nod, almost like a quiet confirmation that justice had been served. He had seen this pattern countless times before, defendants strutting in with bravado, only to crumble when faced with the sharp blade of Judge Judy's logic. But even he seemed to recognize that this one was different. The speed of the transformation, the arrogance, the mockery, and the collapse into tears was astonishing, even for him. The audience sat in a stunned hush. Normally, after a fiery ruling, whispers would ripple through the crowd, people exchanging reactions with raised eyebrows and knowing glances. But in this case, silence said it all. Nobody needed to speak. Everyone understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. And at the center of it all sat the defendant, her face blotchy, her eyes wet, her once proud smirk nowhere to be found. She reached for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes, but the damage had already been done. The cameras had captured every frame of her arrogance and every second of her breakdown. Judge Judy, however, wasn't one to gloat. She didn't lean back in triumph or bask in the humiliation of the defendant. Instead, she maintained her composed demeanor, as if to say, "This isn't about entertainment. This is about respect for the law." But in a way, that made the moment even more powerful. Because Judge Judy didn't need to rub it in. She didn't need to say, "I told you so." The defendant's tears were proof enough that the lesson had landed. And what was that lesson? It was simple, yet profound. Respect matters. In a world where people often confuse confidence with arrogance, or mistake rudeness for strength, this case was a living, breathing example of how quickly the tables can turn. The defendant thought she was above the rules. She thought mocking a judge was funny. But the courtroom is not a stage for arrogance, it's a place where truth and accountability reign. The plaintiff, who had been waiting quietly during the heated exchange, finally allowed a small smile to spread across their face. For them, this wasn't just about the money. It was about validation. It was about knowing that the truth had prevailed, despite the mockery and disrespect they endured. As the ruling was finalized and the paperwork prepared, Judge Judy delivered one final remark that echoed through the room. Let this be a reminder to anyone who walks into this courtroom: when you come here, you come with honesty, you come with respect, and you come prepared to face the truth. If you can't handle that, then you shouldn't be here. It wasn't directed solely at the defendant. It was meant for everyone listening, the audience in the room, the millions watching at home, and perhaps even the next arrogant defendant waiting outside for their turn. The cameras zoomed out as the bailiff began escorting both parties out of the courtroom. The plaintiff walked tall, carrying not just the victory of the ruling, but also the quiet dignity of having trusted the process. The defendant, however, walked out in a very different state. Shoulders slumped, head lowered, still clutching a tissue, she looked nothing like the defiant figure who had walked in earlier. Each step seemed heavier, as though she was carrying the weight of her own choices. And while we can only imagine what was going through her mind at that moment, it isn't hard to guess. Perhaps she was replaying those 47 seconds over and over, realizing how foolish she had looked. Maybe she regretted rolling her eyes, or mocking the ruling, or even walking into the courtroom with that smug attitude in the first place. But one thing is certain, she learned the hard way that when you mock authority, when you laugh at justice, and when you underestimate Judge Judy, you don't walk away unscathed. You walk away humbled. You walk away corrected. And sometimes, as in this case, you walk away in tears. For the audience at home, the clip became unforgettable. Replayed, shared, and discussed, it served as more than just a piece of courtroom drama. It became a reminder of how fragile arrogance really is, and how quickly it can collapse under the weight of truth. Because in the end, it only took 47 seconds for laughter to turn into crying. The case may have ended, the cameras may have stopped rolling, and the audience may have filed out of the courtroom, but the impact of what happened in those brief moments lived far beyond the episode. Because this wasn't just another courtroom squabble over money or damages. This wasn't just about who was right and who was wrong. What we witnessed was a timeless reminder of what happens when arrogance collides with authority, when disrespect meets discipline, and when laughter in the face of justice turns into regret. And all of it happened in just 47 seconds. Let's think about that for a moment. 47 seconds is shorter than the time it takes to boil water for a cup of tea. It's shorter than the average song chorus. It's less time than most of us spend scrolling through a single page on social media. And yet, in that sliver of time, an entire life lesson unfolded in front of millions of viewers. The defendant, this so-called Karen, walked into the courtroom believing she had the upper hand. She thought she could mock the process, laugh at the judge, and walk away unaffected. But what she discovered is something many of us eventually learn: pride has a price. And when you carry yourself with arrogance instead of humility, you will pay that price sooner or later. Judge Judy didn't just hand down a ruling. She handed down a reality check. She reminded everyone watching that the law doesn't bend for arrogance, that respect isn't optional, and that mocking authority has consequences. But let's step beyond the courtroom for a moment, because this isn't just about one case or one defendant. It's about life itself. How many times do we see people walk through life with that same smug attitude? How many times do we witness people who laugh at rules, belittle others, and treat situations with mockery, only to fall apart when reality hits them square in the face? The lesson here is universal. Arrogance may give you temporary confidence, but humility will carry you further. Disrespect may get you a few laughs, but respect will earn you something far more valuable: dignity. And mocking others may feel powerful in the moment, but it will always come back to haunt you. The irony of this story is undeniable. The defendant thought she was untouchable, but her downfall was faster than she could have ever imagined. She thought she was laughing at Judge Judy, but in reality, the whole world ended up laughing at her. That's the danger of arrogance. It blinds you. It makes you think you're in control when, in truth, you're standing on shaky ground. And when the cracks show, everything collapses in an instant. Judge Judy's courtroom has always been more than just a TV show. For decades, it's been a stage where real-life lessons play out in raw, unfiltered form. We've seen greed punished, lies exposed, and disrespect dismantled. But few moments captured the essence of those lessons as perfectly as this one. Because here's the truth: respect isn't about weakness, it's about wisdom. When you respect authority, when you respect the process, when you respect the truth, you protect yourself from humiliation. You show strength not by mocking others, but by carrying yourself with dignity, even when things don't go your way. The plaintiff left that courtroom with more than just a financial victory. They left with the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served and that dignity had triumphed over disrespect. The defendant, on the other hand, left with a far heavier burden: a bruised ego, a public humiliation, and a lesson she'll never forget. And maybe, just maybe, that's the silver lining. Because sometimes the most painful lessons are the ones that stick. Sometimes, you have to feel the sting of humiliation to finally understand the value of humility. So the next time you find yourself tempted to roll your eyes at authority, to laugh at a rule, or to mock someone who deserves your respect, remember this story. Remember how quickly things can turn. Remember that it only took 47 seconds for arrogance to collapse into tears. Because in life, as in Judge Judy's courtroom, disrespect has consequences. Arrogance has limits. And justice, one way or another, always has the final word.